Hi everyone, this is Jason Zach from Nathaniel School of Music. In this lesson, we are going to learn how to read sheet music, also known as staff notation, using a hack that or a concept that works for me in my classes. So I thought I'll share a bit of it in this lesson, and if you'd like, you can also consider a regular course at our music school, Nathaniel School of Music, or look at self-paced learning with our Everything for Life bundle on nathanielschool.com. Or if you're at a certain level where you want to experiment with staff notation, take it to the next level, read complex rhythms, practice sight singing, understand the workings of chord charts, you should definitely consider a semester at our school. Okay, so before we get started, it'll be nice if you can consider getting a blank notebook without any lines, that is, and a pen, pencil, or whatever, and that's about it. And your keyboard might help, but not so much for this video. So let's get cracking. First off, to visualize staff notation, you'll always be looking at 5 lines, very similar to a graph, the y-axis of an xy. And the x generally ends up being points in a normal graph which you see on a news channel to measure things like temperature, let's say. But on music notation, we just have the y. And to start building the notes within the 5-line ecosystem, just note that you can have a note on a line, you can have a note in between the lines. So in total, there will be 4 spaces. This would be space 1, space 2, just calling it as S, space 3, space 4. And then you'll have 5 lines, L1, L2, L3, L4, L5. So now when you'd like to draw a musical note, understand that it has a certain note value, whole note, 4 counts generally, 3 counts, 2 counts, 1 count, half a count, quaver, quarter of a count, semiquaver. Then it might be some dotted notes. Then there are some beaming rules, obviously. Now, all this applies to the x-axis, the rhythm part. And all music notation, or the notes or the note values, will start with that oval shape. Now, where do we put the oval? We can either put the oval on a line, or we can put the oval in between a line. And you have 4 real spaces, if you want to use that term. And then you can go above and beyond. Above and beyond gets slightly tricky at times. So for instance, if I want to play a line note here, that's fine. But what if I want a line note here? That's an extra. What if I want to add a line note here? That's an extra. So we call that a ledger line. I could even draw a space on top there. Now the next question is, what are these pitches? For that to happen, you need clefs. So the clef is a general pitch region, if you will, to operate with. So the treble clef, which I have written for you here, implies notes that are in the treble register or in the high register, or the, generically speaking, the right hand of the piano. The violin, a soprano singer of a choir. Sopranos are or altos. A trumpet, as opposed to what? The bass clef. The bass clef would be instruments like the bass guitar, or the trombone, or the tenor, or the bass vocal, or the viola, or the cello, or the double bass, and you have the euphonium. You have so many instruments in that region. So the bass region for pianists is generally what you do in the left hand, and they have some kind of a division system which is middle C. I tend to not look at that much, but nevertheless, if you want to build it, this would be C in the treble clef, and the same middle C would be here equated in the bass clef. So it's in the bass clef, it's above the 5 lines, just above. In the treble clef is just below the 5 lines. Now, how do we read these notes? Let's first consider the treble clef. The way to look at this is, you have to remember your lines separately, which is E, G, B, D, F, and your spaces separately, F, A, C, E. Now, there are 2 concerns here. If you read your lines as E, G, B, D, F, why can't you also read them as F, D, B, G, E? So if you look at the spaces, F, A, C, E, you could look at it in that easy system, face, F, A, C, E, or you could even look at it as E, C, A, F. which direction is more important? I think the textbooks bias it from low to high, and they make out some sentences like every good boy does something about apples and or cows and grass and all that stuff. I think that's absolute nonsense and misleading also, because my argument to you would be, if you were to remember the spaces as FACE, and if I bring you a note like this is not F, A, C, or E. This is D. And D is a very, very common note. So is C, which is on the line. So there is no value of all these fancy sentences. In fact, in my opinion, it's counterproductive. I used to learn it initially, but I had to kind of get out of it. I almost gave up notation, because every time you have to read a higher note, by default, there's a thought in your brain that it's tough. Why? Why can't you just look at this and it's F? That's it. Why can't you look at this and what is this? This is C. Okay, so that's an important thing. Remember the notes for what they are, and I'll give you a few tips, very important tips to help you remember and practice along. Now, each of these notes, if you observe, I've now drawn the note C. I can draw it in any which way. I can draw the C as a minim, I can draw the C as a crotchet by shading it, or whatever it might be. But the position of C remains the same. That's a whole note C, it's a minim C, or a dotted minim C, up to you really. And the tail or the line depends on where you are in the stave, whether you're a third line above or a third line and below. If it's a below thing, then you'll have to draw like this. Okay, so what about accidentals, or what about adjusting the note C to be, let's say, a C sharp? No big deal. Just draw the sharp just before. What if you want a G flat? No big deal. You can just draw a G flat. What if you're on the treble clef and you are on the A major scale? A major scale would have an F sharp, C sharp, and G sharp. So you need to remember the order of writing the sharps. This is based on the circle of fifths. C, G, D, A, E, B, F sharp, D flat, A flat, E flat, B flat, F, C. So that order is very important. The sharps and the flats carry that order. So you have F sharp, then C sharp, then G sharp, and the way we write it is important. You can also refer to a notation software like MuseScore, which might give you a good jump start if you don't have a teacher. Okay, so A major, if ever you want to play this note would be a C, but it has to be played as a C sharp, isn't it? Because in the key signature of A, all C's are sharp. What if, however, you wanted to actually play C? You would now need to go to that C sharp and write a natural sign. What if you would like in the A major scale to play an F? Normally speaking, that would be F sharp. So if you just want to play an F, you have to actually go and write the accidental sign before the alphabet. Or maybe you'd like to introduce a tritone, which is E flat. So you take E, flatten it there, and it lasts for the duration of the bar. From the next bar onwards, it goes back to good old E. Okay, depending on the time signature of your song, of course. So these are called accidental: sharps, flat, and natural. Now coming to the main thing which I wanted to share in this lesson, how can you remember your musical notes more efficiently without weird sentences and without books which will start you off with the C's and then go up like that? I think intervals are the best. If you break it down, every musical note, if you think about it, is a third apart, and these thirds are very much English thirds as much as they are music thirds. So if you take the clef, let's say treble clef, and the treble clef, incidentally, one way to remember it is you can call it the G clef, where the note G is at this dot. So the dot, just mug that up. So I would say the treble clef should be remembered as the G clef, and as a lot of textbooks have it, of course, and the bass clef could be referred to as the F clef, because that point, that dot is F. Okay. So remember your notation or your staff notation just like how you remember the notes on a guitar fretboard or the notes on a piano. Why should it be an alien language? Think of it just like another instrument code or whatever. So bass clef is sorted, and now each of these, whether you go line to line or whether you go space to space as I'm doing now, these are going to form musical thirds as well as English thirds. Now, what do I mean by an English third? A good way to visualize an English third would be just write English alphabets in a circle. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. There we go. So, if you want to count a third up, English, A's third is C, B's third is D, C's third, C, D, E. So if you want to conquer notation and even your instrument, the thirds are the most important interval. They're the driving force of music. So remember thirds, and a trick would be to write them in a circle. So A's upper third is C, A's lower third is F, A, C, A, F. And then if you were to say A to C sharp would be a major third. If you say A to C, A would be a minor third. If you say A to C flat, that would be a diminished third, but it's still a third because of the alphabet connection. That's why I say alphabet thirds should be remembered. D's third is F, E's third is G. How many thirds do you have to remember in life? Just 7. That's it, because there's 7 alphabets in music. And remember the thirds upwards and downwards. So A's upper third is C, A's down or lower third is F. Get used to that. That's way more important for notation because it's directly proportional to the music that you're going to play. So let's now bring thirds into staff notation. So if you take a line note on the treble clef E, it's third alphabetically E, F, G, 1, 2, 3. So you draw this G, it's the third. Now if you take a space note, this is F. Its third would be A, F, G, A. Now this ends up being E to G would end up being a minor third, but you can so easily make it a major third by sharpening the G to make it G sharp. And you can so easily make what was once, E to G sharp is a major third now. F to A is already a major third. How do I make F to A a minor third? Just by flattening the A. It becomes F to A flat. Correct? So depending on your knowledge of interval theory. So if you're learning staff notation, you need to probably learn intervals or music theory alongside it. Staff notation is not music theory. It's just a symbolic language to write your notes, isn't it? So this is about the thirds. What about all the other intervals? So you need to understand your reference notes. So if you take, let's say, on the treble clef again, E, the first off thing would be seconds. The second is a very next one. So line to space or else space to line. This would form a second interval. So visually you see that, I hope. Line to space, space to line. Now coming to thirds, I'm just revising. I already taught you that. E to G or else C to E. So this would be a pack of thirds. What about the fourths? Just like a guitar fretboard, very similar. You skip one, play one. Or the line becomes the space. Line, skip, space. Hope that makes sense. Line, skip, space. That would be a fourth. Similarly, line, skip, space. That would again be a fourth. However, in this context, if you want to build perfect fourths, we are in business. E to A is a perfect fourth. So currently, F to B is a tritone. How do I make F to B a perfect fourth? Maybe I can take the B, flatten it, and there we have it. Fourth note of the F major scale, perfect fourth. So that's how you could visualize it. Let's now draw another treble clef and build fifths. Fifths are super easy. Line, skip line, or space, skip, space. If you don't skip, if it's the consecutive line or the consecutive space, it's a third. If you skip and keep line, it's a fifth. Okay, and again, the quality of fifth depends on how you write it. If you observe, F to C is currently a perfect fifth, E to B is also a perfect fifth, but if you'd like to change that, why not flatten it? Then that would end up being a perfect fifth minus 1, which is diminished fifth. Moving forward, what about the sixth interval? You'll have your E note and skip, skip, line becomes space. Or you have a space, skip, skip, space becomes a line. So in this case, E to C. What is E to C? A minor sixth. But if you have to convert that to a major sixth, put a sharp in there. Major sixth. F to D is already a major sixth. What if I want to make it a flat? Minor sixth. There we go. And now coming to sevenths. So if you take our E note, what you do is E's seventh would basically be D or D sharp or D flat, depending on how you look at it. It's an alphabet 7. So E, F, G, A, B, C, D. 7 alphabets. So put the D there, and what's the association visually? Line to line. Similarly, space to space, but you have to skip 2 in between. Okay, so what do thirds, fifths, and sevenths have in common? It would retain the visual line, line, or space, space, but then you have to figure out the gaps. And then you'll have 2, 4, 6, and of course the octave, which I'm going to write, that would have the shifts. So 2s would be line to space or space to line, and then 4s same, 6 as we just have written down, and the 7. So if you want to build major sevenths now, that would be E to G sharp and F to E. You just leave it as it is. Or if you want to do minor seventh, well, you flatten the E. And theoretically, if you want to convert this to a diminished seventh, you double flatten the major and you get F to E flat flat, which sounds a bit ridiculous, right? But that is music theory. So last but not least, if you want an octave to balance things out, you have an E and the higher E. So whatever was once a line becomes a space, and whatever was once a space becomes a line. And remember, you can start from anywhere. You have this note, you can go down, you can go even more down. These are what they call as ledger lines. So here you go, you can go above that, one more, and so on and so forth. Of course, in my opinion, at least for me personally, the ledger lines are quite annoying and tough to read, isn't it? So we tend to limit our visual to within the clef, not too much beyond. Otherwise, we have these octave multipliers, or you look at it in an easy way, but it's actually an octave above or below, right? So these are some tips on music notation, how you can hopefully visualize your notes better, or maybe you already read to some level, or maybe you're getting back to it, and hopefully this was a bit refreshing or a different perspective. Anyways, thanks a ton for watching the lesson, and if you enjoyed it, do consider hitting the like, give us a share, leave us a comment with topics that you'd like to learn in the future. And this entire lecture was based on intervals, so do find our intervals playlist where we cover ear training for intervals, we cover piano practice, we cover improvisation for using intervals, and a lot of other things. And if you'd like to structure a course where you work on ear training, music theory, piano technique, sight reading, sight singing, sight a lot of things, and also improvisation, composition, technology, production, and so on, do consider a semester at Nathaniel School. Head over to our website, reach over to our course advisor, and we can build a very action-packed and promising semester for you. Right? Thanks a ton for watching the lesson, and I will catch you in the next one. Cheers.